Don Johnson, the name that once set America ablaze in the 1980s. With pastel suits, a defiant gaze, and a white Ferrari Testarossa on the screen of Miami Vice, he wasn't just an actor. He was the embodiment of cool, of a glittering, fast, and recklessly free era. As Sonny Crockett, Johnson became the face of a nation intoxicated by indulgence and limitless dreams. But behind that nonchalant look and arrogant smile was another man. A poor boy from Missouri, raised in hardship, stepping into life with the defiance of someone who had nothing to lose. Johnson's life has been a constant collision between passion and self-destruction, between moments of dazzling fame and plunges into darkness no one saw coming. He lived amid whiskey, drugs, loud romances, and long, lonely nights. Once loved fiercely by Melanie Griffith, once seen beside Barbra Streisand, he later found himself facing debt, multi-million-dollar lawsuits, and near bankruptcy. Everything he owned, fame, fortune, marriage, had collapsed at one time or another, only to be rebuilt through the stubborn resilience of a man who refused to give up. Now, at 75, Don Johnson is no longer the flashy playboy of the 1980s. He's a man who looks back at his life with calm acceptance, knowing that everything, the spotlight and the scars alike, has shaped who he truly is today. A star who once lost everything, yet chose to rise again, not to shine brighter, but simply to live as himself. Donnie Wayne Johnson was born on December 15, 1949, in Flat Creek, Missouri, a small town tucked in the harsh heart of the Midwest. His father, Freddie, was only 19, and his mother, Nell, just 16. Two young souls, too inexperienced to understand the weight of responsibility, yet suddenly burdened with raising a child amid poverty and uncertainty. The family's ramshackle wooden house in Flat Creek had little more than the sound of wind whistling through the cracks and the smell of engine oil from Freddie's old truck. Freddie worked as a farmer, Nell as a hairdresser, and both struggled to scrape together enough to survive. Don grew up in hunger, in constant moves to escape debt, and in a childhood almost devoid of warmth. When he was 6, the family moved to Wichita, Kansas, hoping for a new beginning. But that beginning turned out to be just another chapter of exhaustion for a poor working-class family. In Johnson's memory, those years were his first lesson in resilience. He once said, "When you grow up with nothing, you learn not to need anyone." That sentence encapsulates almost everything about the man he would become. Someone who lived by instinct and pride, molded by survival. At Wichita South High School, Don was an outsider. He tried everything: football, mechanics, music, but nothing held his interest for long. One day, just to earn enough credits to graduate, he signed up for a drama class. No one could have imagined it would change his life forever. When he stepped onto the stage as Tony in West Side Story, the 17-year-old felt something new. For the first time, he mattered. He was no longer the boy from poverty. He was someone who was finally heard. In 1967, after graduation, Don enrolled in the theater program at the University of Kansas. But classrooms couldn't contain him. After a year, he dropped out and left the Midwest behind, heading to San Francisco, the city of freedom, art, and risk. There, he was accepted into the American Conservatory Theater. With only a few dollars in his pocket and a vague dream, Don began his uncertain journey. A poor young man with no family, no plan, only a conviction that the world would one day have to notice him. As he would later say, "I wasn't born to be ordinary." Leaving San Francisco, Don Johnson stepped into the path most young actors feared: the world of independent theater, brutal, uncertain, and full of rejection. He slept in a run-down rented room, survived on instant noodles, yet every night stood on the tiny stage of the American Conservatory Theater as if it were Broadway itself. In 1969, his first real opportunity arrived. Don was cast as Smitty in Fortune and Men's Eyes, a shocking play for its time, known for its raw depiction of prison life and sexual violence behind bars. Many audience members walked out mid-performance, but critics hailed Johnson as a new face unafraid to go all the way. He didn't just act. He poured into that role all the rage and shame of his childhood, years of poverty and isolation compressed into a single performance. The play not only earned him press coverage, but proved he was willing to do anything to be recognized as a true actor. A year later, in 1970, Don made his big screen debut as the lead in The Magic Garden of Stanley Sweetheart, an MGM youth film about sex, counterculture, and the disillusionment of the post-1960s generation. But his cinematic dream quickly turned into his first major failure. The film bombed. Critics called it immature and shallow, and Johnson was labeled a pretty face with no depth. Instead of quitting, he went quiet and kept acting anywhere there was a stage, even for a few dozen people. Don took roles in cheap TV movies and low-budget independent films simply to keep his dream alive. 10 years passed without fame, but with each small role, he honed his craft. That patience, the stubborn endurance of a Missouri boy, kept him afloat long enough to reach the moment that would change everything. Miami Vice. In the early 1970s, Don Johnson moved to Los Angeles, the city of dreams and the graveyard of thousands who had them. There was no room for the unknown. Don struggled in a tiny rented apartment, working odd jobs to pay rent: waiter, mover, delivery driver. By day, he auditioned. By night, he rehearsed lines in front of the mirror, clinging to the fragile belief that if he just held on long enough, Hollywood would eventually notice him. He landed small roles in little-known films like Zachariah, 1971, The Harrod Experiment, 1973, and A Boy and His Dog, 1975. None brought him fame, but they kept him alive. Despite poverty and loneliness, Don never considered giving up. He once said, "I didn't have a backup plan. If I wasn't acting, I didn't know how else to live." Then in 1976, tragedy struck and changed his life forever. Sal Mineo, his roommate and close friend, was murdered outside his Los Angeles home. The shocking crime shook Hollywood, but for Don, it left a wound that never healed. He was the first to arrive at the scene and saw an image he could never erase. Johnson later said he didn't sleep for months, and from then on, never believed success could come without danger. In the years that followed, he drifted, chasing roles while battling alcohol and drugs. Addiction crept in quietly, the way old fears return. Johnson drank to forget failure, smoked to numb loneliness, yet never stopped acting. Even when intoxicated, he still showed up on set, lines memorized, determined to prove he hadn't fallen apart. Throughout that decade, Don Johnson had no fame, no money, only one thing: the will to survive. That sheer toughness, born from a poor childhood and nights spent running from his own fears, kept him alive long enough to await the great turning point of his career. In 1984, after more than a decade of endless auditions, failures, and surviving in expensive Los Angeles, Don Johnson finally got the chance he had been waiting for all his life. Michael Mann, the acclaimed producer and director known for his cold, precise visual style, saw something different in Johnson: a weary depth, a magnetic stillness that needed no effort. Mann cast him as Detective Sonny Crockett in a new TV project called Miami Vice. No one on the crew could have guessed that this decision would not only change Don Johnson's life, but reshape American pop culture itself. Sonny Crockett was unlike any character television had ever seen. A conflicted undercover cop, both hero and sinner, hardened by the lessons of life. Dressed in white linen jackets and pastel slacks, driving a white Ferrari Testarossa along the neon-lit Miami coast, living on a boat with a pet alligator named Elvis, Crockett walked the razor's edge between justice and corruption. He hunted criminals, yet was a product of the same dark world he pursued. Don Johnson didn't just play Crockett, he became him. The way he dressed, smoked, squinted into the distance, it made the world believe Crockett was real. Miami Vice exploded like a cultural earthquake. Within weeks, it transcended the limits of a crime show. It became the face of the 1980s, a perfect fusion of music, fashion, and the Reagan-era psyche, where dollars, cocaine, and consumerism coexisted in a shimmering dream. Each frame looked like a neon painting: sports cars, synth pop, ocean wind, and reflections of city lights on human skin. And at the center of it all was Don Johnson, the man in the unbuttoned linen jacket, sockless loafers, and that half-tired, half-dangerous gaze. In 1986, he won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a television series, earning 2 more Golden Globe nominations and 1 Emmy nomination in the following years. Overnight, the man who once lived on instant noodles in a cheap LA apartment became a global icon. Fashion magazines chased him. Luxury brands lined up for partnerships. Johnson became the very definition of cool, a new kind of masculinity, effortless, confident, a little wild. But behind the spotlight, he knew he was never truly prepared for success. At the height of fame, Don Johnson began living like the very character he portrayed. He bought supercars, yachts, oceanfront mansions, and luxury watches. He drank champagne for breakfast and raced speedboats, often winning, fueled by alcohol and adrenaline. And along with that lifestyle came the old vices: booze, drugs, excess. His love life spun like scenes from Miami Vice, beauty queens, singers, actresses, all passing through. "I lived like there was no tomorrow," Johnson later admitted. And for a time, it was true. Tomorrow didn't exist. Only speed, lights, and the roar of applause on the Florida shore, where a man stood at the peak of glory, already beginning to slide down the dangerous slope of his own dream. After Miami Vice ended, Don Johnson didn't disappear like so many TV stars trapped forever in the shadow of their defining role. On the contrary, he proved that his career was not confined to Sonny Crockett. In 1985, he appeared in The Long Hot Summer, a remake of the classic film, where Johnson revealed a subtler, more grounded side of his acting, showing audiences that he could step out of the white-suited cop image they had come to adore. By the 1990s, as Hollywood began refreshing itself with younger faces, Don Johnson, then in his 40s, experienced an unexpected rebirth with the hit series Nash Bridges, 1996-2001. As Inspector Nash, he brought a blend of maturity, humor, and hard-earned wisdom, a sharp contrast to the swagger of Sonny Crockett. The show became one of CBS's biggest successes, running for 6 seasons with over 120 episodes. Johnson not only starred in it, but also produced it, cementing his status as one of television's most enduring stars of the decade. But Johnson didn't stop at the screen. At the height of his fame, he ventured into another world: music. In 1986, he released his debut album Heartbeat, a pop-rock project infused with the unmistakable spirit of the 1980s. The title track, Heartbeat, shot straight into the Billboard Hot 100's top 5, a rare feat for a TV actor. The music video, nearly an hour long and filmed like a short movie, was both an artistic statement and a personal manifesto, lonely, wild, and aching for something real. 3 years later came his second album, Let It Roll, 1989. Though it didn't replicate his earlier commercial success, it proved Johnson was more than a one-hit wonder. His raspy, slightly weary voice, paired with his blues rock performance style, carried the same grit as the man himself, someone who had lived through glory and darkness, still trying to tell his story through sound. Alongside acting and music, Don Johnson dove headfirst into another passion, one far more dangerous and expensive: high-speed powerboat racing. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was his true addiction. Johnson once said that the feeling of steering a boat at over 150 miles per hour is like standing at the border between life and death, where every sound disappears except your own heartbeat. In 1988, he reached the pinnacle of the sport when he won the World Powerboat Championship, earning the nickname Hollywood's Mad Driver. In an era obsessed with cocaine and speed, he embodied pure recklessness. A man who didn't just play action heroes, but lived like one. But that recklessness came at a cost. After the triumphs of Miami Vice and the racing world, Johnson continued to live a lifestyle no one, not even him, could sustain. $1 million mansions in California, a private ranch in Colorado, a fleet of supercars, luxury yachts, endless parties, fine wine, and women who drifted through like ocean breeze. Money flowed out as easily as champagne spilled over the deck of his boat. To Hollywood, he was untouchable. To his bank account, he was bleeding dry. Then in 2002, life took a dark turn. While crossing the German-Swiss border, customs officers found financial documents in his car worth nearly $8 billion. Rumors exploded overnight. Don Johnson was accused of international money laundering. European tabloids dubbed him the Hollywood star with dirty money, while American media splashed brutal headlines, from Miami Vice to Money Vice. The investigation dragged on for months before Johnson was completely cleared. The papers were merely investment documents from a consulting firm traveling with him. But the damage was done. The man once synonymous with American cool was now viewed with suspicion. Johnson bitterly remarked, "In Hollywood, nobody cares if you're guilty or not. If the shadow is big enough, it'll cover your whole light." From then on, Don Johnson realized that fame wasn't something that could be sustained by speed or champagne, but realizing it and changing were two very different things. In 2008, he hit rock bottom financially, not in a movie, but in real life. Amid the breathtaking beauty of the Rocky Mountains, where snow blanketed the pines and the sunset painted the valley gold, his 17-acre ranch in Aspen, Colorado, once a symbol of success and freedom, became a battlefield of despair. That home, with its cozy rooms overlooking the mountains, had once hosted family Christmases and served as his refuge after Miami Vice. But now, it was on the brink of foreclosure, over $14.5 million in debt, the result of years of reckless spending, failed investments, and a lifestyle he himself admitted had no off switch. The media pounced. Headlines screamed, "Don Johnson, from $1 million TV star to losing it all." Papers in Los Angeles and Denver counted down the hours to the bank's seizure deadline. Friends from his glory days said he was no longer himself. Quiet, withdrawn, swallowed by darkness. On the night before the deadline, he barely slept. Neighbors later said the lights in his mansion stayed on until dawn, and they saw him standing motionless by the upstairs window, staring out at the snow-covered fields, the same land that once symbolized triumph, now heavy with silence and fear. Then, at the last possible moment, through a series of emergency investment deals and an unexpected wire transfer, Johnson paid off the debt, mere hours before the property would have been seized. The miraculous escape made headlines. "The luckiest man in Hollywood," wrote People magazine, calling it Hollywood's real-life cliffhanger, a scene straight out of one of his own shows. But this time, it was real. Yet that rescue wasn't luck. It was willpower, the same stubborn resilience that had carried him through poverty, addiction, and failure for decades. 2 years later, fate turned again. But this time, he was ready. In 2010, Don Johnson sued Reicher Entertainment, accusing the company of cheating him out of profits from Nash Bridges, the show he had both starred in and co-created. The legal battle dragged on for years and seemed hopeless, until Johnson won a stunning victory. The Los Angeles court ordered Reicher to pay him $23.2 million in damages. After settlements, he received around $19 million. But for him, the true value wasn't monetary. It was symbolic, a reclamation of control. For the first time in years, Don Johnson had taken back his destiny. He was no longer a man crushed by the system, but one who had risen from the ashes of fame. Still, the long spiral of scandal, debt, and litigation had left him disillusioned with Hollywood. In a rare interview, he admitted, "I used to think success meant having more money, more houses, more wine, more people. But the more I had, the emptier I felt." And so, in that quiet reckoning, Don Johnson began to rebuild from within. He cut back expenses, turned down flashy projects, spent more time with family, and reconnected with nature. The man once addicted to speed learned to slow down, to meditate, to keep bees, to grow vegetables, and to read every morning. "I used to live like tomorrow didn't exist," he said softly. "Now I just want to live fully. Today." After the wild years of money, speed, and excess, Don Johnson finally began to learn how to slow down. In middle age, during the quiet nights in the house he had barely saved from foreclosure, he realized that the deepest emptiness wasn't an empty bank account. It was the absence of a place he could truly call home. And when his memories came flooding back, the first name that surfaced was Melanie Griffith, the only woman who had ever made him believe that love could save him. The love story between Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith remains one of Hollywood's most complicated, intriguing, and haunting romances. A relationship that spanned 3 decades, filled with passion, destruction, and scars that time could never erase. They met in the early 1970s, when Melanie was just 14 and Don was 22. At the time, Melanie's mother, actress Tippi Hedren, the star of The Birds, was filming with Don. It was on that set, amid the smell of makeup and the glare of studio lights, that the young actor began to notice his co-star's teenage daughter. Though Don never crossed the line, the connection between them was undeniable. Something innocent yet dangerous, tender yet forbidden. When Melanie turned 18, their feelings became real. Not long after, they married in 1976, despite Tippi Hedren's fierce opposition. Hollywood saw it as an emotional gamble, a young woman barely stepping into adulthood and an actor still wrestling with addiction and obscurity. Yet both believed love could heal them. Their first marriage lasted only 6 months. They were too young, too impulsive, and too damaged. Don was still lost in alcohol and late-night parties, while Melanie, raised in a fractured family, couldn't find the stability she longed for. They separated quietly, each carrying an ache that would linger for years. Later, Melanie admitted, "I loved Don, but we didn't know how to love the right way." After his breakup with Melanie, Don met Patty D'Arbanville, a former model and actress who had once been Andy Warhol's muse. She was wild yet grounded, a woman shaped by the raw energy of early 1980s New York. They met in 1981 at a time when Johnson was trying to rebuild both his career and himself amid the chaos of fame and addiction. With Patty, he found something Hollywood rarely allowed: peace without pretense. The couple moved into a small home in Los Angeles, avoiding parties, staying away from the media, and trying to live like ordinary people. In 1982, they welcomed their son, Jesse Wayne Johnson, Don's first child, and proof that amid all the chaos, he could still be a father, however imperfect. Don once said that Jesse taught me fear for the first time, fear of losing something, fear of not being enough. The years with Patty were among the few times Don truly tried to escape fame's whirlwind. He spent his days fishing, acting, and drinking less. But work pulled him back into the storm. When Miami Vice exploded, Johnson became a global phenomenon, and the distance between a world-famous TV star and a woman craving quiet grew impossible to bridge. By 1985, they had separated. Patty took Jesse and left Los Angeles. Don plunged headfirst into the wildest and brightest years of his life. Their love didn't end in bitterness, but in understanding. Later, Jesse Johnson followed in his father's footsteps, appearing in Redline, Nash Bridges, and several indie projects, as if continuing the part of his father's soul once left behind amid the neon chaos of the 1980s. For Don Johnson, Patty D'Arbanville and Jesse represented more than memories. They were the still point between two storms named Melanie Griffith. The calm before love, fame, and heartbreak would pull him back in once again, because his love story with Melanie was never truly over. Years later, after both had lived through other relationships, fate brought them together again. It was 1989. Don had just emerged from rehab and regained balance, while Melanie was now an acclaimed actress. They met again at a party in Los Angeles. One look and every distance between them vanished. Within months, Don and Melanie remarried. Hollywood was stunned. Two people who had already failed once were brave enough to try again. But this time, something had changed. They were older, wiser, and had suffered enough to understand that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice. That same year, in 1989, they welcomed their daughter, Dakota Johnson, who would later rise to fame in 50 Shades of Grey. For a while, their life seemed like a dream. Don was a global icon thanks to Miami Vice. Melanie earned acclaim for Working Girl, and Dakota grew up surrounded by parents who loved her with everything they had. They were the picture-perfect Hollywood family, but only on the surface. Behind the glossy magazine photos lay fragility. Don still battled old demons, alcohol, sometimes prescription pills. Melanie struggled with depression and anxiety, a fear of losing love, control, and herself. Two people who once found solace in each other's loneliness now found themselves lost again under the same roof. Years later, Don admitted, "I didn't know how to love properly back then. Melanie was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I ruined it with my own hands." Arguments, late-night departures, and long silences became routine. Though they tried for Dakota's sake, the cracks deepened. In 1996, they divorced, this time for good. Yet between them remained a bond that could never be broken: Dakota. They maintained a friendship rooted in mutual respect, co-parenting their daughter with grace. Don was present at every milestone in Dakota's life, and Melanie never spoke ill of him. In one interview, she reflected, "We were too young, too crazy, but love was always there." At 75, Don Johnson finally confessed what he had kept to himself for decades. "I never stopped loving Melanie. I just wasn't mature enough to keep her." To some, it sounded like a late confession, but to Don, it was the most honest redemption he could offer. From a man who once had everything, lost it all, and finally understood that the most precious thing in his life wasn't fame, money, or success, but the woman he once let slip away. After his breakup with Patty D'Arbanville and before reuniting with Melanie Griffith, Don Johnson entered what the press would later call the golden age of his romances. When Miami Vice turned him into a global icon, Don became one of the most desired men in Hollywood. And his love life reflected exactly that: glamorous, passionate, but as fragile as cigarette smoke under neon light. He dated Barbra Streisand, the American icon of both music and film. Their relationship began in the late 1980s, two stars at the height of fame, both strong-willed and seasoned. But what truly surprised the public wasn't just the romance, it was the music. Together they recorded "Till I Loved You," 1988, a romantic duet that climbed into the Billboard Top 40 and remains one of the most memorable love songs of that decade. Don later said, "Barbra was the woman who made me want to be worthy." Yet two powerful personalities rarely coexist peacefully. Their love flared like fireworks, dazzling for a moment before fading under the stage lights. After Barbra came a brief affair with Cybill Shepherd, his co-star in the 1985 miniseries The Long Hot Summer. Both were at the peak of their careers and known for their fiery tempers. The press called them two flames that couldn't burn in the same room. The romance didn't last, but years later, Sybil still described Don as the most magnetic man I ever met. Then came Uma Thurman. She was 18, Don was 38. Their relationship in 1988 sent tabloids into a frenzy over the age gap, though both kept silent. Uma would later say simply, "Don Johnson is a complicated man, and I learned a lot from him." In the 1990s, Don was involved with Penelope Ann Miller, his co-star in Dead Bang, a short but tender relationship that hinted he was beginning to crave something steadier after years of fleeting passion. And then, at nearly 50, he shocked Hollywood by dating Jodie Lynn O'Keefe, the actress who played his daughter in Nash Bridges. Don was 47, Jodie only 18. Though they both claimed it was just a close friendship, the relationship stirred controversy. After a few quiet years, they parted ways, leaving Don once again in the familiar void of middle age. Too weary to keep playing love's reckless games, yet still unable to find where he truly belonged. The turning point came when he met Kelly Flieger, just when he thought his story with love had ended. After countless short-lived romances, heartbreaks, and lonely mornings in a big empty house, Don turned 48 feeling certain he no longer needed anyone. "I'd been through enough to know I didn't need another person in my life," he later said. But then she walked in, gently, as if she had no intention of changing anything. And somehow she changed everything. In 1998, at a party in San Francisco hosted by the Getty family, Don met Kelly Flieger, a kindergarten teacher from an educated, well-respected background, utterly removed from the glitz of Hollywood. At the time, Kelly was engaged to Gavin Newsom, who would later become the governor of California. Yet that meeting between two seemingly opposite worlds sparked something unexpected. Don, the star who had burned through his youth with alcohol and speed, and Kelly, the calm, private woman guided by principle. Everyone said they were incompatible, but sometimes opposites are destiny. They began to meet quietly, for coffee, for long conversations about things that had nothing to do with fame. Children, books, gardening, and the belief that people could change. Don said that for the first time in his life, he felt truly listened to, without judgment. Kelly didn't see a celebrity. She saw a man trying to rebuild himself. That calm acceptance made Don Johnson, once known for his defiance, want, for the first time, to be better. On April 29, 1999, they were married at the Pacific Heights mansion of billionaire Gordon Getty. The ceremony was simple but elegant, attended by close friends including Robert Wagner and Melanie Griffith, proof that despite his turbulent past, Don had managed to preserve genuine human connections. During the ceremony, as he held the hand of the woman nearly 2 decades younger than himself, Don said, "I've had everything, and I've lost it all. But today, I have the one thing worth keeping." Their marriage wasn't a perfect love story, but it was a real one. They have 3 children together: Atherton Grace, born 1999, Jasper Breckenridge, 2002, and Deacon, 2006. The Johnson family settled in San Francisco, far from Hollywood's glare. Don quit drinking, gave up partying, spent time gardening, caring for horses, and driving his kids to school each morning. Friends say he became almost unrecognizable, still witty and charming, but calmer, humbler, and more grounded than ever before. Of course, no marriage is without storms. In the early years, media scrutiny, the age gap, and Don's scandalous reputation weighed heavily on Kelly. But she chose silence over defense, and Don chose to protect her. In a rare interview, he said, "Kelly is the reason I'm still alive. She didn't try to fix me. She made me want to fix myself." Over the years, while many of his peers succumbed to their old demons, Don Johnson maintained a quiet, stable life. He took his children to baseball games, cooked with Kelly, and occasionally appeared at events with Dakota, his daughter from his marriage to Melanie Griffith. The blended family often appeared together, a rare image of harmony in a Hollywood built on division. Now, well into his 70s, Don Johnson still speaks of Kelly with gratitude. "I used to think love was a feeling, but with Kelly, I realized it's an action. It's staying, even when the other person isn't their best self." After decades of chaos, the man who once raced against speedboats and burned himself in excess finally found peace, not in mansions or fame, but in a quiet kitchen where Kelly Flieger smiles and their 3 children call out "Dad" in innocent voices. A quiet ending, perhaps, but the truest happiness Don Johnson has ever known. In the final years of the 1990s, as his marriage to Kelly Flieger brought Don Johnson a rare sense of balance and peace, his career also entered a new chapter. After Nash Bridges, the series that had defined 6 years of his life and was often described as the spiritual successor to Miami Vice, Don no longer chased leading roles or the blinding spotlight. He chose instead to return step by step, slowly but deliberately, with the mindset of a man who had already seen both the peaks and the depths of life. He once said, "I've had enough fame. Now I just want to do what feels real." When Nash Bridges ended in 2001, Don Johnson didn't retire in glory like many of his peers. Instead, he quietly transformed. In his 50s, he began a new journey, no longer the television archetype of cool, but a genuine actor searching for depth. The 2010s revealed a very different Don Johnson, mature, restrained, and confident. In Machete, 2010, by Robert Rodriguez, he played Von Jackson, a ruthless, cold-blooded border vigilante, showing audiences a darkness they had never seen in him before. 2 years later, he appeared in Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, 2012, as Big Daddy Bennett, a southern plantation owner, both menacing and absurdly humorous, leaving a strong impression despite limited screen time. Tarantino once said, "Don Johnson understands how to play with America's irony. He can embody both its past and its present in a single glance." In 2014, he appeared as Jim Bob Luke in Cold in July, a gritty crime thriller alongside Michael C. Hall and Sam Shepard. His portrayal of a weary old-school cowboy earned him praise from critics for his ability to reinvent himself without relying on his former image. Then in 2018, he surprised audiences again with Book Club, a romantic comedy about love in later life, starring opposite Jane Fonda. From Hollywood's quintessential bad boy, Don Johnson had evolved into a man who could embody tenderness and emotional maturity, still charming but now with warmth and wisdom. In 2019, he had a rare double-hit year, appearing in 2 major projects. Knives Out, Rian Johnson's acclaimed whodunit, where he played Richard Drysdale, a shallow, hypocritical member of an upper-class family, and HBO's Watchmen as Police Chief Judd Crawford, a morally ambiguous figure hiding deep secrets about power and justice. These performances proved that Don Johnson was still a formidable presence, able to hold his own among a new generation of actors without relying on nostalgia. In 2021, he returned to Nash Bridges for a special reboot, reuniting with his longtime co-star Cheech Marin. Though time had silvered his hair and softened the once razor-sharp edges of his coolness, Don still radiated that familiar mix of humor, charisma, and calm, the presence of a man who had weathered every storm. Through the 2020s, Don Johnson continued to work steadily, from NBC's Kenan to independent films, not for fame or money, but for the love of the craft. "I don't act to be remembered," he said. "I act because I still have something to say." In 2024, he returned to television as Captain Robert Massey in Dr. Odyssey, a drama series produced by Ryan Murphy for ABC and Hulu. Set aboard a luxury cruise ship called the Odyssey, Johnson played an experienced, proud, and mysterious captain. Though the show lasted only one season before its cancellation in June 2025, Dr. Odyssey reaffirmed Don's enduring magnetism, proof that even at 75 he could command the screen with quiet authority and depth. That same year, Johnson also appeared in Rebel Ridge, a political action thriller from Netflix, playing Chief Sandy Byrne, a figure symbolizing moral conflict and the contradictions of law enforcement. Though not a lead role, critics described his performance as measured, sharp, and weighty, a rare combination amid the flashiness of modern cinema. Beyond acting, Don Johnson continued to nurture his lifelong love for music, a passion that had accompanied him since the 1980s. He maintained the Don Johnson Project, his blues rock band that performed regularly at festivals and small venues across the U.S. In 2024, the band appeared at the Cape Fear Blues Festival, followed by a cross-country tour extending into 2025, including a September performance at the Quad in South Carolina. At 70-something, Johnson still stood on stage. No Hollywood glamour, just the raw sound of guitars, his gravelly voice, and a calm, contented smile. By the end of 2024, he and the band recorded a new studio album under the Hiss and Crackle label and announced plans to release their first live album in early 2025, a reflective tribute to more than 4 decades of musical devotion. In recent interviews, Don Johnson said he no longer chased lead roles or rankings. Instead, he chose projects that made him happy, whether a TV appearance, a new song, or a small-town gig. At 75, after a lifetime of highs and lows, Johnson no longer needs to prove anything. He just wants to keep doing what once saved him from his own darkness, acting and making music. Looking back on more than half a century, Don Johnson's legacy cannot be confined to the image of Sonny Crockett in a linen blazer, speeding through neon-lit Miami streets in a white Ferrari. He is the embodiment of a generation of artists who dared to live to the fullest, sometimes to the point of self-destruction, in pursuit of freedom, fame, and truth in art. From a poor Midwestern boy born to teenage parents, Don Johnson rose to become an icon of an entire era, a time when television and lifestyle merged into one. Miami Vice wasn't just the show that made Don Johnson famous. It redefined the very concept of cool in 1980s American culture. His fashion, pastel suits, white pants, loafers without socks, was hailed by GQ and Esquire as a revolution in modern men's aesthetics. Even luxury brands like Versace, Armani, and Hugo Boss later admitted that the success of Miami Vice helped accelerate the rise of Italian design in the U.S. by nearly a decade. But Don Johnson's influence extended far beyond clothes and style. He was among the first to bridge the gap between television and global stardom, something that had previously belonged only to movie actors. His portrayal of Sonny Crockett introduced a new kind of hero, flawed, conflicted, lonely, a reflection of America's own post-war identity crisis. That archetype would pave the way for the complex television anti-heroes that followed, from Tony Soprano to Walter White. In music, though he released only 2 albums, Don Johnson left a surprising mark with Heartbeat, a 1986 pop hit that reached Billboard's top 5, sold over 1 million copies, and became one of the defining songs of the MTV era. His raspy, unpolished voice and his free-spirited performance style revealed something beyond the stoic cop persona, the soul of a true artist. Younger generations of actors, including his own daughter, Dakota Johnson, have often said that what they admire most about him isn't his fame, but his resilience. Don had faced debt, suspicion, addiction, and loss. Yet he always came back, calm and steadfast. In Hollywood, where youth is currency, a man still acting, making music, and smiling at 75 is living proof of a rare and enduring value: the persistence of passion. Don Johnson's legacy isn't measured in trophies or box office numbers. It lies in how he made a generation believe that no matter where you start, no matter how many times you fall, you can rewrite your own story. As long as you dare to keep living, keep dreaming, and never let go of the light of art. Perhaps what makes Don Johnson truly unforgettable isn't his roles or his fame, but his outlook on life, a serenity earned through decades of turbulence. At 75, he no longer talks about success or comparison. He speaks only of gratitude for the chances he had, the mistakes he made, and the people who stayed. Hollywood may have changed, the lights may have dimmed, but Don Johnson remains himself. An artist who once fell to the bottom and walked out of the darkness gracefully, as if fear had never existed. And maybe that's what makes audiences still love him today. A man who is imperfect, unpolished, yet carries dignity and freedom in every step he takes. Have you ever watched Miami Vice or Nash Bridges and found yourself drawn to that cool man with the sad eyes? Share your thoughts about Don Johnson in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because in the stories to come, we'll take you deeper into a world where the spotlight is just the surface, and the truth is what truly holds your gaze.